WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
A major declaration from the World Health Organization. Hi there and welcome to Power and Politics. I'm Vashi Kapelos. The novel coronavirus, first reported in China last December, is now officially a global pandemic. More than 121,000 cases, the numbers there on your screen, have been reported worldwide, and over 4,000 people have now died. The virus has swept through 114 countries in total. The impact on Canada has now reached a new category, bright red, meaning there are now more than 100 cases confirmed in this country. That's still limited, however, to 4 provinces. Ontario reported 4 new cases today, including the first in Ottawa, Hamilton, and Sudbury. Health officials in Alberta and BC are expected also to deliver updates this hour. We're standing by to bring them to you live. Just a few hours before the World Health Organization declared this a pandemic, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a $1 billion fund he says is aimed at fighting the spread of coronavirus and helping Canadians affected. Included is $500 million for provinces and territories, plus the 1-week waiting period for employment insurance is waived for anyone infected or forced into quarantine. Chrystia Freeland is the Deputy Prime Minister. She joins us in studio. Hi, Minister Freeland. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Vashi.
Very much appreciate it. The WHO has now declared this a global pandemic. What does that mean for Canada?
Well, it means what we have said all along, what I said in question period on Monday, which is this is a serious situation. All the expert advice we are receiving, that Canadians are receiving and people around the world are receiving, is it is very likely to get worse before it gets better. Our job here in Canada is to do what we're doing, which is to prepare very, very energetically to have more cases, to prepare very, very energetically for a strong public health response, which we have had. It's what we're doing. And I think, the message to Canadians is this is serious. We are taking it seriously. The government, and I would say governments across the country, are hard at work. We're ready. We're working on it now. And also to really say this is something that all of us can and must be a part of.
Can I ask you sort of on a macro level, when you talk about preparedness, what is the scenario that the government is planning for? When you look at modeling, for example, what can you tell Canadians right now who I think are very interested in finding out what is the degree to which this is going to affect this country? Are 30% of us maybe going to get sick, up to 70% of us? Like, what is the scenario that the government is preparing for?
So the first thing I would say about that is our government is taking a rigorously science-based approach. We are listening to the experts, and I would really advise Canadians to do that. And actually, I'm proud of Canada and Canadians because we are still a country, and there are a lot of countries that aren't like this, where we know that you need to trust and listen to experts. So that's my first piece of advice, is listen to the experts. In terms of what will happen next, I think the reality is the science is not 100% clear. This is a new phenomenon, and people are doing modeling every day. Our approach is to be very close to listen to the science and to be preparing for worst case scenarios.
So what is worst case scenario? Can you give me some specifics? Because I think Canadians hear worst case scenario. Does that mean all of us get it? What is, from the government's perspective, the worst case scenario?
So what I would say is this. I think a lot of people heard Chancellor Angela Merkel today talking about how it was possible that up to 70% of Germans it was possible, she didn't say likely, possible that up to 70% of Germans would be infected by COVID-19. The science, I think, is offering right now a range of possible outcomes for all countries around the world, from about 30 to 70%. I think the other thing to think about is that the effort of all of us should be, and I think there's even a social media hashtag about this, to flatten the curve. So we do know that it is very likely to get worse before it gets better. What we want to try to do, and what we can do if we work hard on this as we are, is try to avoid a sharp peak, which would be a real strain on our healthcare system. The other thing I would say that is really important, and the measures, many of the measures that the Prime Minister announced this morning in our $1 billion COVID response package, a lot of the measures were targeted at being sure that individual Canadians didn't face a disincentive to do the right thing.
I want to ask you about that, because it does address people who need to access EI because they're quarantined or they're self-isolating. What about people, and we've been getting the message day in and day out from public health officials, even if you have the sniffles, even if you feel sick in any way, stay home for work.
Exactly.
There's a lot of people who don't have sick leave for that. There's nothing in this package today addressed at them. When will there be? And what will it be?
So let me start with the EI. That is really important because it is so important to be encouraging Canadians, if you're feeling unwell, stay home. And it's just unfair that people would face a financial penalty for doing that. The EI change will address that. You're right that there are still some gaps, and we are very focused on that, working on that.
Why wasn't that part of today's announcement? Because I take your point on those who have to quarantine and self-isolate. Surely that's a big part of it. But a big part of flattening the curve, as you mentioned, is making sure if you are ill in any way that you're not interacting socially. And if there isn't anything to help someone who has to take a sick day but isn't covered for it, what incentive is there to take that sick day?
Well, I hope and believe that people will be taking those sick days, will be staying home if they're feeling unwell. And what I want to say about today's package is this was a strong, significant, and meaningful response by the federal government, both on the public health side, $500 million for the provinces to support provincial healthcare systems. And the Prime Minister said today, and this is absolutely the case, we will be there to support Canada's excellent healthcare system. We are not going to quibble about federal provincial responsibilities, and there are measures in place to support individual workers and businesses. Is the job done? Absolutely not.
With respect, I'm not trying to take away from what you announced today, but I'm asking specifically, there are people right now who are worried about taking a sick day. When will the government address that?
As I said, this is a developing situation, as Canadians have known since the end of last year. And so I think what people need to know is that the government is on it. Today was a strong response, and we will be continuing with new measures really constantly. And that's the reason, Vashi, that the Prime Minister put together the ad hoc coronavirus cabinet committee to allow us to take decisions much more quickly in real time. This committee has a call every morning at 8:30 in the morning. We met yesterday. We will meet again tomorrow. So I absolutely really endorse the premise of your question, which is we need to keep on acting. The measures we announced today are a strong step. They're not even the beginning, because we have been working on this for months now. We will need to continue to act, and we will be continuing to act. An important moment is going to be the meeting tomorrow and on Friday with premiers.
And I do want to ask you about that before you leave, because we heard from Jason Kenney earlier today. We know that the impact, the fiscal impact on Alberta's coffers right now is set to be enormous. Already they were dealing with a tough situation. I know you're familiar with that. But with the oil price drop, with the impact of the slowdown on the economy because of coronavirus, they're dealing with a rough situation. He said that he has not received a response to any of the asks he initially made last year. Is the government prepared in the upcoming budget to address fiscal stabilization? Will you remove the cap, and will you be making retroactive payments to Alberta?
Okay, so there's so many questions in there. And
really just one. Are you going to help Alberta?
We will definitely help Alberta.
In what capacity?
Let me just start by saying I'm not going to reveal any of Bill Morneau's budget secrets. He wouldn't talk to me ever again, and that would be very wrong. I do want to say about the First Minister's meeting that this comes at a very good time. I'm very glad that the Prime Minister and the First Ministers, and I'll be there too, will have an opportunity to get together. We had a lot of things to talk about in any event. it will be, I think that coronavirus will be very much on the agenda, and this is one of the areas where Canada has to work together, where the federal government and the provinces need to work together. We will do that. The health ministers have been doing a terrific job, and this will be a chance for the first ministers.
But beyond Alberta,
when it comes to Alberta, and let me actually also take that question more generally. One of the things that you saw today in the $1 billion coronavirus response package that the Prime Minister announced is being very clear that we understand, first and foremost, the job is to keep Canadians safe and healthy. That is the first obligation of everyone, and I know that Canadians know that's where our priority needs to be. We understand there are already economic effects from this, and just looking at what is happening around the world, we're seeing a global economic impact which is significant. Our government knows that. We have put some measures in place today, and our economic response will be there, will continue. We have the firepower to handle it. In terms of what that economic response will look like, first and foremost—
For Alberta, if you could, because my question was specifically about them.
I will get to Alberta, but it is not— It is Alberta and it is other provinces too. So in terms of thinking about the economic response, this is how I think we need to think about it. We need to think about workers who need to not face a disincentive to stay home, and also workers who are finding some dislocation in their jobs because of the broader economic impact of coronavirus. We need to think of businesses which are facing pressures, including financial pressures, and some measures were announced today with CRA, with EDC.
I understand that.
To support them. There are also specific sectors of the economy that we already see coming under particular pressure. And I would say those are, what we can see right now, particular pressure in tourism-related industries, including airlines, with whom the Prime Minister had a meeting, and absolutely particular pressure in the oil and gas sector. I had a very good conversation with Secretary Mike Pompeo, the U.S. Secretary of State, about oil and gas, about the struggle we're seeing between Saudi Arabia and Russia right now, which is having such a powerful impact on the price of oil.
Will the government directly address the consequence of that crisis?
Yes, we will.
And in what way?
Well, the impact of the coronavirus, including the Saudi-Russian, I don't know how to characterize it, standoff, struggle, which is having an impact on the price of oil. This is very new. This is something that happened over the weekend and had a powerful impact on the price of oil on Monday. Of course, we understand that the pressures are there, and we absolutely understand that there needs to be a response.
The ask preceded the standoff, though, right? The ask from Premier Kennedy. I'm just wondering, will that ask be responded to?
Actually, Vashi, if I may, there were a set of concerns that Alberta had around its economy. The situation has actually changed. And so the kind of response that we need to be thinking of
for the worst,
needs to change also.
Does that mean the response will change as well?
Yeah, the response definitely needs to be tailored to these economic circumstances. And I really want to say to Canadians two things, that we get the magnitude of this. Our focus is first and foremost on keeping Canadians healthy and safe, and we are going to do that. We are doing that. We've been working on it for months. We also understand there are significant economic consequences. Those consequences are complex, and this is a new type of strain on the global economy. The Canadian economy is strong. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We are very well positioned to tackle this challenge, and we will.
Okay, Minister, I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland there. So what other measures should the government consider? Pierre Poilievre is the Conservatives' finance critic, and next to him, Lindsay Matheson is the NDP's deputy critic for small business. They join us from the House of Commons foyer. Hi there to both of you. Thanks for making time for us.
Hello.
Mr. Poilievre, I want to start with you. I actually want to pick up right where I left off with Minister Freeland, and that is on help for Alberta. She was not able to specifically give me any information on what measures we might see in the budget or prior to the budget. We know the hit to Alberta's fiscal, to their coffers is huge at this point, to the economy there is huge. What does the Conservative Party want to see the federal government do where Alberta is concerned?
Let's start with the context. Prior to the Russian-Saudi price war on oil, Alberta's economy was on its knees. The unemployment rate is higher there than in almost the entire rest of the country. In rural Alberta, young men are unemployed at a rate of 20%. Suicides, divorces, defaults, delinquencies, insolvencies, and bankruptcies are skyrocketing. 30% of Calgary's downtown commercial real estate is empty. The Nexon Tower, one of the biggest towers in the city of Calgary, is literally 100% empty. There's not a single human being working inside it. This is a crisis on a massive scale, and that was before the oil price plummeted in response to the Saudi-Russian price war. I think the medium-term solution is to get pipelines built to reverse the anti-pipeline policies of the government and the anti-development policies, which have killed 2 pipelines and most recently the Tech Frontier mine. The government, but more urgently, the federal government needs to help Alberta to do environmental cleanup of orphaned or abandoned wells. There's something like 100,000 conventional oil wells that have been dug open and left idle because the companies that dug those wells literally have no money, and so they can't reclaim them environmentally.
Well, lots of them have gone bankrupt.
Exactly, and we conservatives have put forward 2 proposals to help with this problem. One is a tax credit to encourage companies to go in and remediate those wells, to clean them up and prevent an environmental disaster while creating work on the ground. The second is to allow companies to set aside money in trusts, environmental trusts, when they first dig the well, so that the cash is there 10 years down the road when the well is dry and the company might have gone out of business. There's still cash to remediate the well. We don't have this kind of crisis down the road. So those are that's one example of how we can stimulate some economic activity while preventing an environmental problem. But more broadly, we need to unleash the power of free enterprise through deregulation of red tape, lowering taxes, and getting the federal government's foot off the throat of the Alberta economy.
Okay, I want to follow up on that, but first I want to just get Ms. Matheson in here. Your party today was asking specifically about something I also asked Minister Freeland about, and that is the lack of measures in the announcement today directed at people who need to take sick leave, not quarantine, not because they've been diagnosed with coronavirus, but just need to take sick leave. What exactly is it that you want the government to do about that?
Yes, absolutely. This is something that we know won't actually help 60% of workers. While it's important to ensure that they have access to EI, so many workers don't. There are so many people who are self-employed, and they cannot take the time, they cannot take those sick days that the government is encouraging them to take to actually help with this situation. I know that there are a lot of people who would want to, but they simply can't do that. For so many people, we know that 46% of the population lives within $200 of insolvency. And so a day off, 2 days off, 3 days off, that means maybe not being able to make the rent or pay for food. And so this government hasn't done anything to think of those people. And what we need is a solution that helps every Canadian, that helps all Canadians across the board and doesn't leave anybody behind.
Are you asking, though, just sorry to interrupt, but are you asking for example, direct income support, money to people who have to take a sick day and that day isn't covered by their employer? Like, what exactly do you want them to do?
Absolutely. All of these options are available to the government. And what we're asking for the government to do is realize that they have left out a huge swath of people that they're not actually addressing with this announcement that they made today. They need to provide leadership for the people who are desperately looking for it. They want to help out. They want to make sure that they're not passing on the illness to coworkers, to family, to community members, to their children, but they need the help to do it, and it is up to this government to ensure that they do that. We were also talking about the help to Indigenous nations, people who are without even running water. So when the government says, oh, you need to self-quarantine, what happens when you're in inadequate housing? And
I think there was money directed towards Indigenous communities today.
Certainly
right?
not enough, though. And when they say, you have to wash your hands, when you don't have clean drinking or running water, these are situations, and it's something that the government hasn't thought of. They haven't gone far enough to think about these issues.
Mr. Poilievre, you were making the point prior to my question to Ms. Matheson around unleashing, I think you said, the power of free enterprise. And you mentioned in that the idea of tax cuts. I understand the premise behind that, obviously directed towards economic growth, which has been anemic in the last little while. But is now the time to consider something like tax cuts? And I ask because we don't know what kind of a revenue pickle the federal government is going to be in based on what's happening with coronavirus and the growth that, the slow growth that preceded even what happened with coronavirus. Is now really the time for tax cuts?
The government doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. Spending has grown by 1/3 since this government has took office. In fact, spending's been growing around 3 times as fast as the combined rate of inflation and population growth. That is absolutely unsustainable. And so they need to slow the growth of government spending in order to make our fiscal path sustainable. But they also need to lower taxes to stimulate the consumer spending, investment, and business operations, leave more money in the productive economy, and unleash the power of free enterprise to get our economy moving again.
Say we take take it as a fact that they do have a spending problem. Just put aside that for a second. Don't they also have a revenue problem though right now, given the economy right now? Like I'm not saying tax cuts are terrible and all the time and that kind of thing, but in this instance, right now, when the economy is performing the way it is and the future is so uncertain, is now the time to deplete revenues even more?
Well, that's exactly the problem that Trudeau's created by running a deficit before we even got into this crisis. While the sun was shining on the world economy, Trudeau was spending himself into these massive deficits. We kept saying, why don't you save up for the winter storm that will inevitably come? And he ignored us, and surely enough, here we are with this storm. And Trudeau is like Aesop's grasshopper, who's now looking in the cupboards and finding that they're bare. He should have stocked those cupboards in the bad time, and then we would have the resources to get us through this crisis, which we knew a crisis of some kind would inevitably come.
Ms. Matheson, on the, sorry, do you want to jump in there?
Well, it often is, thank you, the Conservatives believe that you do go to tax cuts. And you're absolutely right. They have a surplus issue. They're giving tons of money away to MasterCard, to Loblaws, in their middle-class tax cut. It's a loss of $6 billion to the economy. And those are the things that need to go into social programs. Those are the things that need to go into the diversification of the Alberta economy to ensure that people have those jobs in a green economy that we know can go forward and that can grow and that can provide the prosperity to ensure that we have.
I get all that, and I know that there's obviously a lot of discussion around the future of Alberta's economy, but the point is right now that economy is being hit, and it's being hit very hard. Do you support, Ms. Matheson, the federal government injecting money through, for example, lifting the cap on the fiscal stabilization program?
I think that, again, they have a lot of options at hand. But again, we get back to, on the ground, people right now worrying about feeding their families, worrying about paying for their rent, worrying about prescription drug costs, all of those things that people are dealing with and that are keeping them up at night. And this program that has been announced today simply doesn't do the job.
I understand, but my question was about helping Alberta specifically. Does your party support increasing, for example, money through the fiscal stabilization program?
I think that these are discussions that are certainly open and that the government needs to listen to. They need to be responsive to all the provinces that are that need that help. And I think that going forward, those conversations are very important.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this evening. I appreciate it. Thanks to Pierre Poilievre and Lindsay Matheson. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.